To tell me substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win. Stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now. It's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200, the independent politics and media podcast. We've got lots of people on the airwaves today. Is that what they're called? Is this airwaves? I don't know how the internet works. Welcome to the podcast, John. How you doing?
Not too bad. The internet is a series of tubes.
Well, they travel through air?
I think tubes can do that. I mean, you know.
All right, I'll take it. Philip, back after a long hiatus.
Morning, hey everyone. Nice to be back.
Ginny, welcome back.
Thanks. I'm back after last week. Oh, so I thought the internet was in tubes underwater. Like,
Some of it is.
so sharks could bite them.
Yeah. I guess the airwaves from whatever is producing the sound of this podcast to the ears of the people listening to it. And last but not least, Simon, welcome back again as well.
Kia ora, much like at the orgy, I'm always done last. That's kind of a slanderous thing to say about sharks, because apparently they don't do it very often. In fact, they don't like to do those exploratory bites at all. I was just reading something very interesting about the undersea cables, and the big reputation that sharks have about that is apparently slander against them. So I think we should drop that from the podcast before the sharks sue us. Some of them must be rich. They're like 300 years old, the Greenland sharks.
Yeah. I'm leaving it in. We've got a lot of things to cover again, which is why we have so many people here to cover all the different bits. I'm not sure how long this will be, so book out your calendar for the next 3 hours. We're kicking off with UK election news. It's been a really fun way to analyze politics in New Zealand, is to look at how stupid things get in the UK and watch New Zealand politicians slowly follow them. John, you're not our man on the inside, but you're close.
I have the most amount of brain poisoning created by 29 years of living there, yes. As I said the last time we did a UK update, things are bad there. They're very bad. I think we're currently experiencing the most toxic set of Brit vibes that have possibly been seen since the Brexit referendum.
Since the breakup between the Oasis brothers?
Let's not go there, man. Let's not go there. I don't want to get into that again. So Rishi Sunak called a snap election. Nobody knows why, including him. The election is taking place during the Euro 2024 football tournament. So football's coming home. And it was the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings this week as well. So where's your fucking poppy? It is hard to describe how fucking badly this election appears to be going for literally everyone in the UK. Nobody is having a fun time. Everybody is miserable. It is possibly the most British an election has been in a while. Like, where do you want to start? Because we could look at how badly the Tories are doing. We could look at how fucking weird Labour are. We could talk about the Lib Dems and their wonderful photo ops of falling in rivers. We could talk about how a lot of the independent kind of think tanks who are not right-wing, or even the ones who are slightly right-wing, are going, guys, there's some really bad shit coming and no one appears to care. We could talk about Luke Akehurst.
Oh, let's start with him. Let's start with him because I think he's incredibly indicative of the way that politics is turning in the West. He is. I mean, I'll let you give us the adjectives.
Luke Akehurst is a 52-year-old serial election loser. Luke has been in the background of the Labour Party for the best part of 3 decades now. And Luke loves a few things. He loves nuclear weapons. He believes that you can use a tactical weapon as a warning shot. Luke loves Israel. He's the director of a group called We Believe in Israel, because if you stop believing in it, it stops existing, much like houses in our country when landlords stop believing in them. And he's been on the NEC, the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, for probably the last 4 or 5 years now. And has been instrumental in completely gutting any kind of left-wing candidate, suspending anyone who liked tweets about other parties, and ruling them out. And he's been given a safe seat. Luke lives in Oxford. He's been given a seat in Durham. That's quite far away. At the first visit to his new electorate, because it's a safe seat, he's going to win. some pro-Palestine protesters turned up and protested. And his Luke Akehurst's wife was caught on video telling them that they should go, that they belong in Iran, which is fantastically racist all by itself because these were British people, Geordies. So the accent on the video is incredible from the woman going, "What do you mean I belong in Iran? I'm from around here. You're not." He's also got multiple complaints in on him now about anti-Semitism because he's on video multiple times talking about how some Jewish people aren't properly Jewish because they don't even go to shul, or that some small groups of Jewish people are being used to make Zionism look bad. Like, these are public statements that he had made previously, but the thing is, no one cared, and no one still cares. There was a comment by Matt Zarb-Cousin over in the UK today. He's like, the reason the press are not currently going after Labour like they did 4 years ago and 6 years ago and 9 years ago is because they know that Labour's going to win and they don't want to get offside with the incoming government. To put it bluntly, the Tory party in the UK have lost the mandate of heaven that the British media give them. And it means that some complete psychos are about to become Labour MPs, which is not good.
Think like the ACT Party people who were culled from the list, right?
Think like your Tanya Unkovic kind of New Zealand First kind of people. Think about people who were born, like when they were born, they cut a lanyard, not an umbilical cord. You know, their first cradle was a briefcase. Like, they've been put in the Clockwork Orange machine watching the 1997 election victory since birth. Like, we're talking about the kind of dead-eyed psychos that even Tony Blair would go, "Oh, that's a little bit far, don't you think?" And they have been spread out like fucking horrible spore seeds of Keir Starmer across the UK, dropped into seats where they have absolutely no connection because they're safe seats. And I'm not going to say it's scary, but the problem is these are, the purpose of the machine is what it does, not what it says it does. And these are professional backstabbers, shit stirrers, and trouble. Like, their job is to eliminate the opposition. I don't know how that's going to work when they're actually government and say there's a massive whopping majority. Like, the factionalism that could erupt in this Labour Party is terrifying, especially because the leadership apparently has no control over any of this.
That's the thing, right? Like, you say opposition, but they've been aimed internally for the last 2 or 3 years.
Exactly. I was going to bring this up. Like, do you think there's actually, I just don't see why this is a wise choice. Like, even the people who are effective backroom operatives, which I don't think Akehurst is a good example of, but some of them in the past have been decent kind of backroom assassins, right? I don't think smoke-filled room operatives make good MPs for the most part. Like, it gets referred to as like rewarding Starmer's allies, but why is it a reward to thrust people into the limelight? It's not like the pay is above and beyond what you could fob off to these people anyway, right? Isn't this what consultancy's for? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, Akehurst is reportedly the source of that comment last year when Labour councillors were resigning over Gaza, saying, "Oh no, this is just the party shaking off the fleas." He's more than likely the one who said that the potential loss of the Birmingham mayoral election last month was more of a victory for Hamas than Birmingham. Like, he's that guy. And one of the things he's not going to be able to get away with as much anymore is the anonymity, because he wasn't a public figure. He wasn't a recognizable figure. Once you're an MP, you cannot keep playing the game the same way. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that works. I mean, looking around how Labour has approached this election, obviously they were surprised because everyone was surprised. But the first thing they started to do was Lloyd Russell Moyle was deselected for tweets dating back over a decade. So they could have gone after him at any point in the last 5 years, but they chose now to deselect him and drop one of Starmer's allies into a seat. Faiza Shaheen in Chingford and Woodford, who was who nearly beat Ian Duncan Smith at the last election, also deselected for liking a tweet which was a commentary on the Israel lobby based on a Jon Stewart sketch about it. Jon Stewart instead of saying this is the dumbest thing since they elected Boris Johnson, she was deselected the day she'd already started campaigning. She'd already been selected by her local party. She's now running as an independent, and they tried to get rid of Diane Abbott, which leave Auntie Diane alone. frankly. Like they put out that because she'd been suspended since like middle of last year for an article in a letter she wrote in the Observer, which she then apologized for. And right up until after the election was called, Starmer was still saying, "Oh well, the investigation's still ongoing." Turned out the investigation finished in February, so no one had told him that it had finished, or he was deliberately not knowing that it was finished. They then kind of put out in the media, "Oh yeah, they're going to reinstate her, but ask her she's not going to run at the next election." To which Diane Abbott went, "No, fuck you, I'm standing. Like, fight me, bro. I fucking dare you to deselect me." And they gave in. They actually gave in on it. They said, okay. And then there was a rumor that she was going to go to the House of Lords, which, if you knew Diane Abbott, no, that's not happening either. And so eventually they had to go, yeah, I guess, she's got like I think 70% of her electorate voted for her at the last election. She's immensely popular. She's the first Black woman MP in the UK. She is that person. They can't get away with just shuffling her off like Corbyn and others. Like, because it's Auntie Diane. If they had done her like that, they have already got problems with the Muslim vote because of Gaza. Do you really want to go after the Black vote as well? Again, this appears to be just the factionalism and them trying desperately to get their people into seats and try and clear stuff out. And it looks like it's too much because they spent the first week of the election talking about this, a whole week just on Diane Abbott and these deselections. And the second week was about tax. Unfortunately, Rishi Sunak's had a dreadful week, so it's better for them. But one thing I noticed was, I'm going to go back a bit here. You remember the Labour Leaks report that came out in 2020, which was all about the factionalism. It was the one they've just dropped the legal case against 5 staffers about after spending £2.5 million on it. In that report, there was a discussion. There was a guy called Ewan Phillips, who was the director of Labour Against Anti-Semitism. Ewan is a Gentile, like myself. Ewan made up an alias, David Gordstein, to report Labour members. It's very tasteful. Now, Ewan Phillips was furious this week because Labour hadn't cut enough people. Why is John McDonnell still standing? Why is Andy McDonald? Why is Diane Abbott? Literally anyone in the Socialist Campaign Group who's left, he was like, and when I say left, I don't mean left wing because all of them really aren't anymore, but who is left in the party. He was like, we've made complaints about these people. They could have purged a lot of them. And it's like, Starmer did all this, has become unpopular in public for doing it. And yet the people who he is trying to appease are like, no, you must purge further. And if there's a more perfect example of why the politics of the UK Labour Party at the minute are not just not going to solve the problem, they are causing themselves further problems, which will only emerge once they get into power. It is this 4 years of hardcore factionalism, and nobody still knows exactly what they want to do.
Just thinking about Stalinist Keir Starmer.
Seriously, if Corbyn had done like a fifth of the shit Starmer's done in the last 2 weeks, like they'd have probably like dropped the SAS and like taken him out. Like, it is Keir Stalin, it really is.
I'll welcome my good friend Berrier and I call on the purges to go further.
Berrier winning here in like Durham North.
Berrier being parachuted into like fucking Bradford Leeds or something.
It's hard to kind of, and this is just the factionalism stuff. When we actually talk about the politics of it, Labour's manifesto got confirmed at the Clause 5 meeting today. The Unite Union, one of the biggest unions in the UK, can't endorse it because it doesn't do enough on 0-hour contracts and not getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap the Tories brought in, or oil and gas. The manifesto is being described as more of a set of kind of directions, or it's
vibes.
It's a vibes manifesto. Like, even when you get down to the stuff they're claiming they want to do, like Great British Energy, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's good. It's an investment vehicle. That's what they're building. They're calling it an energy company, but it's actually an investment company. It's not about making energy. It's not about nationalizing anything. It's just another investment vehicle where some people will get paid lots of money to head it up. And I will bet you that those people were advisors to the last Labour government.
What is this, Auckland Council? Where's the fucking movement for a different set of, I don't know, electoral strategy? Like, it seems pretty widespread kind of dismay with the structure of, everyone, using the kind of perennial everyone. seems pretty sad about the state of affairs in the UK. But why is there no Rod Donald kicking people's door down saying, what the fuck is up with FPP? Like, there doesn't seem to be any momentum for MMP or PR or an alternative state of, like, I don't know, structure of voting electoralism. It doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know. The same people who have always complained about the parlous state of a two-party democracy are still the only ones, as far as I can see, doing that. Like, people who would obviously gain, like Green Party and Lib Dems, of course, they're gonna say, wouldn't it be nice if we had greater representation? And yes, it would be, but I don't know. Why is there no sympathy from the big, 70% of voters who are still going to vote for the big two?
The last time we tried this was 2014, 2013. The Lib Dems went into their devil's pact with the Tories to do lots of austerity and raise, like, tighten benefits for a 5p charge on plastic bags, which is still one of my favorite tweets of all time. And the electorate just went, no, fuck you. We don't want this weird foreign European election thing. Like, we don't want that. We want, we want good old fashioned British democracy where everyone's fucking pissed off all the time, but that's what you get. I mean, even if the Lib Dems, which some of the polling is saying the Lib Dems might become the official opposition if the Tories do that badly, they might push for PR, but they're not going to get it. Like, it's one of these things that in Britain, it cannot possibly be done because it is not desired by the establishment. Proportional representation and electoral reform does not have the mandate of heaven. And if the media do not want to give, if they don't want to, then it doesn't happen. If they do not want to notice things, those things will go unnoticed no matter what anyone else says. If they do not want to remember things, then things go unremembered. It is the way Britain works. You're not allowed to actually look beyond even the borders or the very tight boundaries of what is the accepted politics, which is why you've now got Labour and the Tories effectively doing the same thing in an election. The Greens and Lib Dems picking off the disaffected voters around the edges, but also Nigel Farage's Reform Party and George
Reform
Galloway.
Company, isn't it, though?
It is, because he's the director, isn't he? And much like one day, one of 200 will make the electoral scene.
No.
One day, Kyle will just see this milkshake arcing towards him.
Listen, Britain is a country in which the supreme authority all is vested entirely in one man, right? And his name is Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, but he's busy at the minute because he's on honeymoon for like the 5th time, aged 97.
Yeah, but it's fascinating that, like, Tony Blair to win, and everyone kept on talking about, I suppose when Corbyn was there, they were like, oh yeah, but like Blair was a center right winger and he won. It's like, well, firstly, in 1997 he promised a lot of vaguely kind of like center leftish things, which was a bit of a change. But secondly, he had flown personally, I think, to Australia to kiss Rupert Murdoch's ring. Like, he had actually done the legwork for the real people who needed, whose consent he needed. He didn't care about the electorate because they were just going to follow with whatever the tabloids were going to say. And Keir Starmer has done essentially the same thing, where he's tried to ally himself a little more with the newspaper owners. And I think that that's the key kind of big difference with it, is that they're sort of the representatives of that ruling elite. Because, being a journalist in the UK is not so much a job as kind of like a vocation in the same way that the clergy was. It's like your third child. Once you've got the heir and the spare, the one who's kind of like dumb, who you don't need to know anything about if you're from like a ruling class family, if you're from an aristocratic family, you're like, they can be a journalist, whatever, I don't care. So that's who they all are. And if you're wondering like why they all have double-barreled surnames, that's why. But it's kind of fascinating that I think there's that common thread between it, because something that people haven't, well, they pointed out on Twitter or whatever, but not particularly outside of that, is that Corbyn was considered a resounding failure, and he's remembered in that sense. But the vote share that Corbyn got in 2017, or Labour got under Corbyn, is pretty much the same as what Labour is polling now, except now they're going to win by fucking North Korean party margins. Like, that's just how wrong FPP is. But it's fascinating that the remembrance of those two things is fundamentally different. A really small point that I wanted to just insert, because I wasn't sure exactly if you'd said this, is that Luke Akehurst has done the whole like Gino Jew in name only thing, like these people aren't real Jews and stuff. He is not Jewish. He is also somebody who is a Gentile who is saying this shit. So there's just like this extra layer of anti-Semitism where he's taking the rhetoric where those weird skeevy American Zionists do that kind of hop, skip, and jump thing. And then he's like saying that, and he's just, it's so out the gate. It's so brazen, you know?
It's crazy. I mean, we should probably move a little bit away from on Labour, even though they are dreadful. But like the Tories are polling around 20%. That is 22% down on the last election, and Rishi Sunak is having a dreadful week because it's D-Day. So you've got to go to France, you got to go and stand on the beaches, you got to go and mingle with people. And
Got to say you nuke someone.
Yeah, he fucked off midway through the day to fly back to the UK in a private jet to do a pre-recorded ITV interview that won't be out for next week, which meant that there's photos of Keir Starmer on a beach with the king mingling with other heads of state. And he didn't see that there was anything wrong with that until everyone went, did you just abandon like the last 20 veterans that we have of World War II to go and talk to Paul Brand of ITV to claim that you're not a liar?
I can't believe anything other than the fact that Sunak is either trying to lose or being made to lose with some of
He's
these
worth
things.
$860 million.
Yeah.
The man is going to be in the San Fernando Valley drinking a nice
He's
Shiraz.
gonna be
in a
fine.
month's time.
Yeah.
Oh, he's going to be fine, but
We
like
will
it's...
find them in the boardrooms. We will find them in the stock exchange.
It's unbelievable how badly they're fucking it. Like they had one hit, which was where they said in the first debate, he said, well, Labour's going to raise taxes by £2,000 per person per year. And Starmer refused to like come back on him about that. And then the next day they went, oh, he's lying. But it kind of stuck. But since then, it's just been one thing after another. But the D-Day thing is the one where like it's the third rail of British politics is the fucking poppy. You know, like it's a thing that it's one of the things that sunk Corbyn when they started to say, well, he refused to sing the national anthem at the cenotaph, and it's like that wasn't true. He refused to bow with a deep enough bow. Don't know if you guys remember that news story where someone had actually calculated the angle of bow, and his one was deemed as a disrespectful bow, whereas other, you know, it's that kind of thing, and it's
10
very
degrees.
it's very weird to see this like unpatriotic thing be applied to a Tory prime minister, but you can't get away from the fact that they're calling him unpatriotic and that he doesn't care because he's brown, because fundamentally Britain is a racist country, and there is, you know, he's not unpatriotic, he doesn't really care about the people of this country, and it's just like, cool, yeah, we know where this is.
Yeah, we need some bowel phrenology scientist to come in with a
Getting the calipers out. They did do that. Yeah.
It's what the problem is. We're like, this is 14 years into a Tory government, and it's an austerity government. And anyone who's been paying attention in New Zealand will have noticed there are some similarities. Labour spent all the money. We have to do this. It's difficult. We're going to have to make difficult choices. No, we're not going to fund the things we said we funded. Like the UK is at the end point of this, or at least it's at an inflection point for it, I guess, because you've got like the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying this week that among the main parties, there is a conspiracy of silence among the taxation or spending that's going to need to be done just to make the country operate beyond this election. Like they are actually saying like neither party is actually talking about what the fuck they're going to do here. Like the Institute for Government have said, UK public services are on the brink of collapse. Whoever comes in has to either make extremely deep cuts because there's like a £33 billion hole, or they've got to raise taxes in some way, except Labour believes that they're going to get in by saying, we will not raise any taxes on anyone ever. The Tories are saying they're going to raise your taxes, but we're going to raise taxes a little bit, but not that badly. But there's still this kind of, they're locked in this death spiral of we can't raise taxes anymore because technically at the minute, taxes in the UK are higher than they have ever been. And that's mostly because since 2008, you know, the big city engine never really got restarted over there. And that was what funded the Blair years, was all that good shit from 97 to 08. And since 2008, they've just been like, no, it'll come back. Trust me, bro. Just one more year of dropping corporation tax. Trust me, bro, it's going to come back. And it's not. And the Labour are like, yeah, we're going to stick with the Tories' plans because that's what Blair did, except Blair did that in the 90s, like 5 years out from like the exchange rate mechanism fuck up, where the country was struggling, but it was about to start growing again. We're now like 14, 16 years since the crisis, and COVID kind of punched things a little bit harder, but there hasn't been a recovery that should be there. So it's almost like UK Labour is attempting to cosplay like it's 1997 again, except the material conditions are so radically changed. What does that mean for us, though? Because are we going to see Chris Hipkins try and Keir Starmer his way into power in 2-3 years, or someone else from the Labour Party try and do it in a few years' time? Because that appears to be the only acceptable way that Labour parties believe they can win power, which is, well, we just have to be a bit more like them. But as we've seen, like the National Party and ACT and New Zealand First are so far away from their own previous governments in terms of policy and economics that, like, thinking that you can win by copying them is just like abdicating any responsibility for thinking you've got a job to make things better. Oh man, I don't know. Like, I'm looking forward to July 4th because it'll be fun to watch lots of Tory MPs lose their seats. But it's not going to be fun to watch Keir Starmer kind of assume that like he now can do whatever the fuck he wants, because as we've seen, whenever he gets the power to do what he wants, be it the Crown Prosecution Service, it's locking up people after fast courts or not prosecuting certain individuals and getting a knighthood for it, or it's like brutal factionalization. Like, he's going to have state power behind him. Like, what does that look like? If what we're hoping for is that he's too boring to do any bad shit, yeah, okay. The last time the UK elected an untrustworthy Labour leader to Prime Minister, because no one really trusted Blair, like in the couple of years afterwards, we all know how that one ended. Starmer has less moral character. He has more cowardice, and he is more easily pushed by the people around him. And some of those people are Luke Akehurst. Some of those people are terrifying transphobes, and he will bend when he is put under pressure.
Thankfully, there are no prospects for war on the horizon, so
don't worry. He said he'd push the nuclear button this week, because to be prime minister in the UK, you've got to agree that you would incinerate everyone.
Yeah, Jeremy, will you kill 2 million people? Jeremy. I remember that question time. That was fun.
I you know what? I read a really nice. There's a Corbyn standing, and I fucking hope he wins because he deserves it. Like, he hasn't changed any of his opinions. You know, he is not. He is still going, yeah, none of these guys have any of the solutions. This idea about everyone, we've got to do nuclear war because it's fucking great. This is stupid, and everyone knows it's stupid. And when you read the argument, you look at it and go, yeah. And most people, when they see that argument, go, yeah, but you're not allowed to have that opinion. Again, it doesn't fit within the tiny box of acceptable politics, you know, which currently has Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are two bald men fighting over a comb at the minute. They really are. They don't have any defining characteristics which make them that much different from each other. Like, if Starmer doesn't realize it, the end of Rishi Sunak's political career is going to be like his own, but he doesn't see that because he's too convinced that maybe this time for me, this will work, you know?
Yeah. It's been this defining characteristic of Western liberal democracy over the last couple of decades, right? Where we're talking about this tiny little box that the major parties are trying to fit into, and the box just gets moved to the right. And we've seen it happen here. We're seeing it happen here in real time with this national government. You know, you're saying, John, that the current makeup of government is a huge change even from the John Key years, even from previous national parties. And you've already got Labour trying to hedge that to some extent, rather than coming out incredibly strongly against it and trying to pull it violently in the other direction, which is what they should be doing. But in the US as well, you've seen the same thing happening as they head towards an election. Just this week, after saying again and again that they were different on the border than the Republicans, Biden announced a Trump policy to block people's right to seek asylum. It's happening all over the world, you know.
Which is illegal under both international law and US constitutional law. So there's that. But I mean, the current Supreme Court's not going to rule that. But it is like if you plainly read the Bill of Rights and the American Constitution, all the first, few amendments, it's just you can't do this.
But it's their attempt to because they are refusing to shift their policy on the Gaza genocide. They're trying to find ways to gather Trump voters, but I assume they just don't understand that is never going to be possible anymore. Like that line is too heavily drawn at this point. And yeah, they're trying to somehow be Trump light in a number of different ways.
It's pretty well reported now, but I feel like it took quite a while to kind of come out that Biden's circle is so detached from kind of political reality that they still think it's the fucking 80s or 90s, right? Like he's trying to be Mitt Romney. It just doesn't make sense. Like that political coherence is disintegrated, but the only people around him are the people saying we have nothing to fear, like simply be a Republican light and we'll get the all 7 Nikki Haley voters to, cohere around you and create an unstoppable behemoth of the runaway train or whatever it is, right? But it's pretty fucking embarrassing. Like if you've read any of the interviews with political Democratic, big D Democratic quote unquote strategists or whatever about their concerns about all the polls saying that he's basically fucked. It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad to see that like that's the state of the most highly paid political operatives in the US is people saying, no, probably not, looking at statistics and being like, feels wrong, I don't like it. That's not the vibes that I wanted. No, it's the children who are wrong energy from people who've had, 6-figure political consulting careers for 30 years. It's pretty depressing.
No one in these institutions knows how to win anymore. They know how to watch their opponent lose. And that's been the way for a rather long time. Interesting that you make the reference back to the 90s as well, in the same way that we're talking about with Labour and Blair, because it really is an institutional structure that was built during that time. And it's just churned out and replicated these kind of horrible freaks, but with no meritocratic kind of mechanism there. So you just got people who all face inwards, cut off their leadership from making any decisions, and refuse to look out the window.
Albanese is another reference point, right? The small target strategy is like, I feel like everyone learned the wrong lessons from the Australian election, which was essentially a matter of time in the same way as the UK is looking. But in the US, it's working in the other direction, right? There's no alternative to the unipolar failure of both big parties, right? And, in the same way as John was talking about, like, there's a reason that Blair didn't fucking make Alistair Campbell an MP. Like, it would have made him a weaker operative. And you just can't go around handing people little baubles and thinking that you can just wait your way into success. It's bizarre. It is anti-meritocratic. Like, you're not rewarding success by being, I just feel like people are coasting like there's some kind of international commodities boom, and there's not. Like, it's not recognizing the material reality that we live in. Like, finance capital isn't what it was in the mid 2000s.
The people around them are doing fine. Like, it's probably pretty fucking good for the upper classes right now, because that's where all the money, everything's going up. Everything's just being vacuumed up. And a lot of these policies are about taking the last fucking scraps by decimating the public service. That's what's happening here in New Zealand. There's nowhere else for them to extract from, except the bodies of the poor. It's not going to end well if our ostensibly left or centre-left parties don't clue up to that, and like far, far quicker than they are. I'm not treating something like UK Labour as a left-wing party in any sense at this point, perhaps outside the membership. I think there's still more hope for them perhaps in the DNC. And I think we should be more hopeful here about New Zealand Labour in lots of ways. People around Chris Hipkins, because we're such a small country, are still having to talk to their communities in a way that people in some of those bigger countries just don't. So Hipkins hasn't been as quick to jump on particular, what are they called, culture war wagons as some of his compatriots overseas. But you also, it's such a stupid thing to always have to return to, but you have to also have policies that are going to deliver for people on the ground. And I just don't see any real will to do that because the center left is so fucking scared of corporates and of what their allies in the media are going to say about them behind their backs or or not behind their backs, right out in the open. The other big thing in the US this week is that the US House voted to sanction the International Criminal Court, mostly a Republican bill, but a bunch of Democrats joined in as well. International rules-based order, what do we think?
Well, we talked about this last week. We literally joked about them doing it, I think. We were like, wouldn't it be really funny if that actually happened? Because it sounded completely ridiculous and bizarre, and it actually has. I mean, I think it's entirely unsurprising. I think everything that Biden has said in the past 2 weeks has become increasingly Zionist and dementia riddled. So this seems like the logical conclusion of all of that talk. Like, I think we've progressed to a point where I just don't see, I mean, everyone sees videos of him, right? Like that he's whatever worm is piloting that body or whatever alien entity is like shuffling around inside of his brain, it's shutting down as well. Like nothing he has done in the past 2 weeks has been coherent by international law, let alone domestic law standards. Like just as you said before, like his whole stance on the border is catastrophic and quite frankly inhumane. But that's what I think we can come to expect from Biden's camp and have expected in the past 8 months with regards to his conduct around Gaza and the war in Palestine. So honestly, I'm entirely unsurprised. And we always knew that they would retaliate in some way. Like he couldn't stop himself from retaliating against the ruling that the ICC actually passed down. Like it wasn't enough to leave it at like harsh comments or to be like, oh, we don't believe that, we'll always support our brothers Israel. Like he was going to do something out the book, and this is it. And I know that it's not going to do a lot. Like it's highly unlikely that this actually manifests in anything that's actually legally meaningful. Like it's obviously a symbolic gesture. But I think all this is, and all this sort of makes me really feel shit about, is just, it's a reminder of the unconditional support that everyone has for this particular stance on the war in Gaza. And it's just like you would think that and you would hope that the tide is turning. I feel like you see that the tide is turning a little bit locally. People are, I hate to use the phrase waking up, but people are sort of like, realizing that everything is not kosher and it's not good. And they're joining the rest of us and the people in the camp of people that can think and have common sense. But I think this vote really is quite disheartening, I think probably, and will be for a lot of people that live in the States and have to understand and deal with the fact that the person that controls a lot of their lives is supported by all these people who are also in power in the bureaucracy that just don't see the people that are suffering in Gaza as human. And that sucks, So legally, I don't think incredibly meaningful at all, but it's just depressing.
We've been kind of lucky. I mean, not lucky this week, but there's been kind of some, I'm not sure if they're bright spots or something. Like New Zealand has decided that they'd put a pause on their $1 million to UNRWA
That's right.
earlier this year, but now they've said, no, we're going to make that payment on time. So New Zealand didn't actually stop any money. We just put a pause on it. Kind of if there had been any basis to the claims that the IDF made, there weren't. That money would not have been paid. But Winston, I think, said yesterday, Winston Peters was just like, we're actually going to make that payment. And the UN overnight have added Israel to the list of states committing violations against children, which is, again, it's a signifier because it's like, if you're on the list, then the UN are meant to engage with you. And it's not like the UN haven't been engaging with them. But as usual, the response from Netanyahu is the UN has added itself to the blacklist of history when it joined those who support the Hamas murderers for saying, hey, do you want to stop killing kids?
UN is Hamas. UN is Hamas now.
I mean, UN has been Hamas for ages. Let's be honest about
the UN
that.
has, but it is them. There's some coverage of it, and they just say Israel should have been added to this list years ago, but weren't because of political pressure. But it is, like you say, this slow, it's glacial, and it's barely got any weight to it. But it is this, no, they are doing that.
Israel has a military court for children. I mean, let's just,
let's remind people of that fact,
there are so many little things that are moving where people just go, oh yeah, actually. I mean, again, like we said earlier, there are things that we are allowed to know and allowed to remember and allowed to accept and allowed to notice, and there are things we are not. And the longer the genocide in Gaza continues, the more things that it is impossible to ignore. Like, it's hard to ignore 36,000 plus corpses. It's hard to ignore the assessments of northern Gaza where they're like, this is going to take decades to rebuild. It's hard to ignore Israel going, yes, we're going to rebuild it as the Singapore of the Middle East. It's going to be like a free port, and it's going to have a train to Neom and shit. And you're just like,
Yeah.
what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, a brief return to UK Labour stuff, but this week in the manifesto, there will apparently be a commitment to the two-state solution. So we're back to Camp David shit. As was pointed out very quickly, Labour in the UK taking the bold and revolutionary policy of the British Foreign Secretary David Cameron, formerly Conservative Prime Minister, who was also said the same thing, because they said, yeah, we're going to recognise the state of Palestine before the end of the peace process. But then immediately, like, the handbrake turn was on, because it was like, well, we can't recognise it unless, like, there's a secure state of Israel. And I'm like, we all know what that means. That means there is no Gaza left. That means the West Bank doesn't exist either. I mean, the US is doing that thing where they're warning Israel, do not fuck with Lebanon. We have told you not to fuck with Lebanon because we can't stop Iran. You know we're not going to be able to stop them if you go into Lebanon again. But Israel's so high off their own supply, man. The Israeli state is so convinced that this is it. This is the wipe them out, expand the borders. We will beat Hamas. We will beat Hezbollah. We will beat anybody. Despite the amount of internal strife in that country, like, you've got the Orthodox being drafted and they are protesting against that. You've got the families of those hostages who still remain alive, and it is a dwindling number, criticizing the government and being treated like an enemy of the state by the government. There is no way out of this that doesn't end with Netanyahu in the dock somewhere, or the death toll going into the hundreds of thousands, and like Tel Aviv having some big fucking smoking holes in it. And it's one of these things that everyone can see. We can all see it. You can all see what's going to happen, but we are being told, no, don't worry about it. And not just that, but if you do worry about it, that's, you are Hamas now. Like, it's been obvious from the start what this has been. It's been obvious for 20 years what this is going to be. And we're now at the point, and everyone's pretending things aren't as bad as they are. In Biden's case, it's because he thinks he's going to get reelected by walking a narrow path, which is, human rights for some, genocides for others. And, if you like the land you've stolen, you can keep it. But that's not going to work, like, because people have got eyes. They can see this stuff. And banning TikTok is not going to help. Banning TikTok's not going to help you. Saying we stand with Israel, like breaking up the rules-based international order because Benjamin Netanyahu is a fucking psychopath, is just, again, it's like, everything's bad. I want to, like, dig a hole and, like, hide for about 100 years. I'm going to go down to Peter Thiel's bunker in Wanaka and just break in, I think. Sorry.
In Minecraft.
No, you can do that in real life. That's fine.
I think people have kind of pointed out that Israel, its strategic interest to the United States is dwindling as it becomes more of a liability, which I think was true of apartheid South Africa. And this is true. And it's also doing the same thing in its death throes that South Africa did, which is trying to fight a war on multiple fronts against its neighbors. Because, I mean, Israel does that regularly because it's a country which it just has that kind of fascist internal engine, as all ethno-states do, where you have to placate the populace by every few years just invading somebody. So it did it in 2006 in Lebanon. It did Operation Protective Edge, and in the early 2010s, and it has to continue to do this. So they're essentially threatening to do the same thing, I think, as you pointed out, John, again, but it's not going to pan out. And the other thing is, people kind of ask, well, if Israel doesn't have as much strategic interest for the United States in the Middle East, and it is more of a liability than anything, why does the US continue to support it? And the thing is that it's a machine that runs on its own now. So the entire, lobbying apparatus in the United States, the entire, NatSec blob, for which Israel's sort of a keystone to oil interests in not only the region, but as a kind of global US global hegemony, right? Militarily as well, or its place to, the fusion between police departments in the United States and Israeli military and police, the use of training and tactics and knowledge and training. I think all of these things have grown into such an industry which moves on their own since the 70s that now, even though Israel is becoming more of a liability than anything else, the machine still moves on its own. And still, you've got people like Biden who are true believers who will continue to promote the genocide. So it is kind of, the writing is on the wall. I mean, I agree, but, that doesn't mean there's not going to be a huge amount more death and suffering in the remaining time, because the US will continue to back it to the hilt. I think there is a lack of rationality and reasonability to that foreign policy now. It's past the point where there is a justifiable national security reason, or rather like sort of global imperial security reason, why the United States should back Israel to the hilt. It really should have abandoned it by now, but it's a machine that runs on its own. And that's the scary thing about it, I think. And the handmaidens to power who will continue to sort of manufacture the consent for it, like the New York Times recently publishing a headline that, strikes, I mean, who knows where they came from, right? Who killed Gazans, because they're not allowed to say Palestinians or Palestine in the New York Times style guide. Destroyed an ex-school. I don't know what an ex-school is.
That one was
where people were
wild.
sheltering.
Because they started out as
apparently
school. It started
the
out
New York
as school.
Times has
Once it's
invented
destroyed,
the
it's not a
concept
school
of that.
anymore, Simon. It's pretty obvious.
And any school or hospital in the Gaza area should be considered an ex-school once the IDF have been near it.
Yeah.
That's just how it is, I'm afraid. Hey, anyone remember when Israel would never bomb a hospital? Remember the good old days?
No,
David Seymour has gone to an ex-school. It's okay. It's not a currently running school.
the that New York Times ex-school article was fucking wild as well, because when it initially was published, it said school, it said UN school, and then it said former UN school, and then it said ex-UN school.
Yeah.
Like you saw that public relations management happening in real time.
You wouldn't know them. My war crime goes to another school.
It's all looking pretty bad. And I think the other thing we need to keep in mind as well is that, you're saying, Simon, we're getting to the point where it just falls over. But once it falls over there, we're really at the fascism returning home stage.
Yeah.
That's when we start to see an outbreak of this stuff in the US, I think, in particular, to an extent that we haven't before. Because the home for the US military industrial complex, the testing ground, won't exist in a way that is stable enough for them to be continuing that practice on the corporate level. They're going to have to find new places to do it.
It's already like Cop City in Atlanta is another example of this, is where it is coming into the metropole. And rather than the external colonies, as Aimé Césaire sort of points out in Discourse on Colonialism. And I think that's already happening. And like you say, what happens, the death throes might last for a long time. Like this might take some time, even though the writing is on the wall. But the thing is, something has to happen to those people, because like they're settler colonizers, right? Like Israeli people are not going to stay there. When the state collapses, they're going to go somewhere else. And like if the United States opens its arms to them, quote unquote, as refugees, same thing has happened with Rhodesia, with South Africa. They're going to get, like Heather Duplessis Allen came here. You know what I mean? They're going to see similar horrors in the United States with people going over there. They're going to get their own Heather Duplessis Allens, is all I'm saying.
Let's leave the international stuff behind. Do a quick run through what's been happening in New Zealand. Was it a good campaign policy to lie about paying for cancer treatments when they knew that wasn't how the mechanism worked, and then fail to fund them in the budget? What do we think, folks?
It's smart politics, Kyle. The optics of it. It's just maneuvering. It's just, playing the game, really. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Well,
Being
Thomas
a smooth
Cochran, where did you
operator.
come from?
Let's think about it rationally. I mean, how many voters' lives are they really saving by funding these drugs? I mean, they were going to die anyway. You might as well not factor them into your 2026 election, and you're saving hundreds of millions of dollars at the same time. I mean, this is the kind of pragmatic, rational politics that you just wouldn't see from a Labour government with their focus on trying to save people's lives. I mean,
Yeah, I think
Technology run rampant. Yeah,
if
disgusting.
you're running the country like a CEO, then obviously I think you're looking to get the highest ROI, right? So I think, you're right in your observation there that if these people aren't going to be around to vote for you at the next election, then why bother?
You're just
You know?
optimizing the throughputs.
Yeah, exactly. It makes so much sense. You're like streamlining the inbound journey here for future national voters.
it's
Yeah.
actually the inverse of what Labour did, which is by saving so many voters over 65 during the COVID pandemic, they
True.
inadvertently gave National an incredible boost. I mean, if you look at the UK, they killed hundreds of thousands of their elderly people, and their Tory party has completely collapsed in the polls. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so.
Damn it, we learned the wrong lessons from the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, it truly, if
Yeah.
if Labour had been worse at COVID, they would be still in power. That's obviously the lesson we should learn from this.
Yikes, I love it. Like in general, I think the obviously the kind of economics of health is a really uncomfortable subject for good reason. And I think it should be. Like, I don't think it should be like something that sits easily with people discussing, the sunk costs of keeping people alive, how much it should cost to, like, how much it's worth, right? I think that's a very healthy thing for people to be uncomfortable with. But also I don't think it's healthy that National runs every election on a very specific platform of saving, whichever minority of rich people are adversely affected with something this year. And whoever Paddy Gower's been talking to, essentially. So I don't think that's, or Guy and Espin now, but I don't think that's a healthy way to run a health campaign either. So I think
the synthetic cannabis vote's about to become huge.
I mean, like, there will be. That'll be in 2 elections, right?
Oh no, 2 elections. It's going to be the gout election. So we're going to provide hundreds of millions of dollars to treat every old person who has a little bit too much port.
Well, I think
Paddy Gouter.
Paddy Gower, very nice.
Oh no!
For the
I think
Susie
that is-
Wiles episode, it's going to be tuberculosis versus those without.
But I think there is like a serious point to be made about like specific health promises in elections in New Zealand, where we have a Farm Act model. And like, I don't think the left has really nailed how to campaign in this environment, because like, you can't really do a left populism when you leave health decisions up to the quote unquote experts, right? There is like a technocratic mechanism in New Zealand in the form of Farm Act that for the most part does a fucking excellent job of distributing scarce resources. And it's something that I think both the left and the centre left kind of need to grapple with, how you engage with that electorally.
It's pretty. I'd say the trick is just not to look at branded medications and focus on infrastructure. But both parties have been so scared to talk about the infrastructure deficit and the cost of that's precluded them from doing any populism in that space. But think about the number of votes you could get by saying, we're actually going to make sure your hospital walls aren't rotting. We're going to make sure that you can get a GP visit on time and it's not going to cost you like 2 dinners or whatever. There's a range of stuff that can be done there. They've just chosen not to.
And even looking at cancer specifically, like, that can be partly obviated by saying, well, a big reason why people are being diagnosed very late is because they can't go to their GP, right?
Exactly.
Like, you can't have those initial visits and things. And it's not a panacea, but that's a really basic thing for a lot of people. It's like when I was involved in coronial services in the coroner's court, there was a big problem where doctors couldn't sign off that they knew that somebody had natural causes deaths of a specific thing, even though it was obviously like a natural causes death, because people don't have family doctors who know you really well anymore, that you regularly go to and see and have checkups and that. Like, very few people do have that sort of relationship, or increasingly a lot of people don't. People will go to an after hours clinic if something happens, or people don't have that sort of relationship with a GP for their family throughout their lifetime, because that model doesn't exist. And partly that's because, the health system in general is underfunded, and primary healthcare providers are this weird kind of mixed model. And partly it's the corporatization, where you've seen doctors have said, oh, actually, if we have like a brand and we can be like the doctors or whatever, Tauranga, and then this other place in Hamilton and whatever, like, you can suddenly make a lot more money if we have like a corporate model to being a GP. It's messed up. But I agree with you totally, Kyle, that you take it holistically, and there are two prongs to it, right? And one of them doesn't necessarily address pharmac, which is, we need to revamp the entire healthcare system, and we need to refund everything. And the other one is that technical expertise has to be in-house, because a huge amount of the research which goes into creating pharmacological technologies is something which is developed on the public dollar in universities. It is then taken by private pharmaceutical companies who patent it and make huge amounts of money off something which is funded publicly. You can I think New Zealand is probably not that likely to be able to do this on its own. But theoretically, if you had like a non-evil good version of the TPPA, right, where you had this coordination with other
non-evil
countries,
version. Okay.
yeah,
All right.
Like we can
which is what
dream. We can
Labour,
fucking dream.
which is what Labour built as CPTPPA, where it actually, because that had nothing to do with free trade, right? And it wasn't anything to do with that. Where you actually have coordination across borders, right? And you can say, well, there's expertise in China where they're developing research in public universities there, where you can actually just publicly create these medications, and you don't need to have Bayer, and you don't need to have all of these pharmaceutical companies for a lot of these drugs and for a lot of this research, because it's not always profitable. Like, for example, it's a bit of a moonshot, and I don't know if there is much real impetus, or there aren't really legs behind this. For example, China recently coming out with research for longer term solutions to diabetes, which aren't just regular checking and blood pricking and insulin shots and all of that, but might ameliorate the disease itself, right? And saying, well, that's not profitable, because then you can't continue to sell people insulin forever or whatever. So pharmaceutical companies want nothing to do with it. Or lung cancer vaccines coming out of Cuba, that's not profitable either, because if you can't continue to, give medication to people, or it's a very small slice of people, or there are a number of sort of market reasons why under capitalism it isn't something which is profitable, that's not going to be of interest to pharmaceutical companies. And pharmac is a kind of compromised position where the government is bargaining with pharmaceuticals, right? And it does a really good job of that. I think Philip pointed out it's kind of the best possible model, at least from what we can see, of that version. But you don't have to see medicine, you don't have to see healthcare provision as being that model where capitalism has to exist. It can be entirely public, and it should be, because anything else undermines and degrades the idea of universality to it. And the first people who go when there's no universality are the people on the margins of your society. And those are the people who we have to care about the most, the ones who walk away from Omelas. Like, what does it mean for a society if, the bulk of people in your settler colony who represent the kind of main dominating racial class are able to get away with something, but, like the people who are on the margins don't, or people who are subaltern don't? That's kind of a meaningless society. Why even have a society at that point?
Yeah, it's, again, the answers, the path is quite clear, but how we would get to the decision makers to accept that or walk down it is really the challenge here. What's been incredible this week as well is Minister of Workplace Relations Brooke Van Velden has announced that she's going to start doing or looking at a policy to pro rata sick leave, which is going to mostly impact, I think, people who work part-time or casually, which might be people who are very ill with cancer, for example, who have also been told by this government that they should go and find a job rather than being allowed to collect a benefit. It's just this incredibly nasty coalescence of right-wing policy and thought and approach to human beings. I can't believe that these people haven't been just run out of the building at this stage. What a fucking awful thing to do.
It's testing the water, actually. This isn't as far as it goes. This is just because they had someone on from the Employers Association going, actually, the examples we use barely ever happen. But it's, again, we've talked about anecdata before and how the government tend to use that to justify the policies. But this getting 50,000 people off the benefit thing, that's the thing we should really be looking at, because that is That is your austerity politics, turning the win system into an even more punitive one, making it even more punitive than the last national government did, or the stuff that Labour continued to do while it was in power. But this is just testing the water. Like this is not the outrageous thing. The outrageous stuff is coming. It's going to be when disabled people can't leave their own homes, or when people starve to death, and we're going to be told, well, we've got to make sacrifices because line needs to go up.
Yeah.
It is. And it's not like the people within like MSD and stuff aren't aware of how horrible this is going to be. I am pretty certain that there are a lot of people going, okay, so you're saying this many people, but you're not telling us how to do it. And it's still, this government does have a strain of managerialism in it, but it's that sort out the infrastructure deficit. No, we're not going to tell you how, but we'll punish you if you fuck it up. Get these 50,000 people off the dole. We're not going to tell you how. You've just got to work out a way to make the numbers work. Because it means that when stuff happens, they can say, well, that's an operational issue. We just wanted a good outcome. We didn't actually have any control over how that outcome occurred, or when it goes wrong. It's, well, that's not what we intended. And that's very much the CEO style. But you can see, like, it's right to be angry at what this government is doing right now. It is right to be outraged. But there is the sensation that this government is like Homer Simpson's professional boxing career, in that they are currently letting us punch them as hard as they can in the face until we get tired, so that when the really bad things start happening, we are too tired to actually go after them. And unfortunately, Chris Hipkins is no Dedrick Tatum. He's not going to come in with a knockout punch at any time soon. He is not going to do that. Although I know we said earlier about Hipkins not approaching stuff, him pointing out stuff like they've got $124 million out of the housing budget is good. It's actually good that he's doing that.
Yeah, and he should be a Labour Party strategist.
But he is pointing at some of the things that are going, well, this thing is bad and this thing is bad. And he's also letting like the cancer drug stuff happen as well, which is sometimes, especially during Andrew Little's time as leader of opposition, he was barking at every car that went past him.
Yeah.
And the Angry Andy thing and all that, you guys will remember that nonsense. If anything, Hipkins, and this is not handing it to him, Phil, we only save that for David Seymour. If anything, he is kind of picking some of his targets a little bit more carefully, a little too carefully, maybe. Yeah. But he's not, because if he'd spent an entire week screaming about cancer drugs, the story would not have developed, because the media wouldn't have been able to pat themselves on the back for being thorough investigative journalists and finding all these stories. It would have been Hipkins criticizes government, Lutzen says fuck you, yeah, whatever, job done, But because he's kind of gone, no, we're going to do something else. It just kind of, sometimes with this government, it's not about opposing them by shouting at them. It's about letting the bad things they're doing stand on their own merits.
Yeah, you don't need to take an easy win. It's already a win. When they fuck up, it's already a win. Go and make it harder for them. Open up a new front, right? That's a fair point on Hipkins. I think
not handing it to him.
And not handing it to him. He's still not doing a good job. Because like you say, I think you're right. Other commentators have said this as well, that National are trying to get a bunch of the bad stuff out early so that they can then have a clearer run to the next election. And it should be contingent on Labour and a bunch of the other kind of more progressive organizations, but also just like general civil society at this point, because even kind of more conservative institutions have got to be feeling it right now, that these should be opportunities for organizing and for building networks, and not just punching National in the face. These are inflection points where you can get more people on board, where you can recruit, where you can upskill people in how to protest, and how to organize against a malicious state and corporate kind of entity, with the understanding that the fight is going to be far, far more necessary in the relatively near future.
I mean, electorally, this is year one, right? Like, I think that's something that I don't know who's really pointed this out explicitly, but I feel like that's quite important to remember. Is we're still in the very early throes of this pretty nasty right wing government, and this is what you would do if you were a right wing government in year one. You pay off your fucking benefactors and allies, right? That's what you do. That's what John Key did. Any smart kind of right wing leader, this is what you do first: is you pay back your class
Yeah.
who got
Hey
you.
boys, the bribes worked. Yeah, you can see.
There you go. So, I mean, really, the challenge is going to come in year two and year three, where they're trying to hide the fact that that's what they've been doing without compromising their coalition, which is basically going to be impossible. I think most people are kind of agreed on that. So, of course, it's going to get messier, right? But also, John's right that it's going to get worse before it gets. Things can only get worse, right? So I don't think it's going to become sunnier as time goes on, but that's going to be difficult because they can't copy the Key model of meeting the kid and being like, hey, we're actually going to stop people flying over to Australia to make more money. We're going to do ultra fast broadband. We're going to do a cycleway whilst still kind of selling minority shares and assets and doing that soft right wing stuff, increasing GST. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to increase.
Yeah, asset sales are green policy now, apparently.
Yeah, that's true.
Heyo.
Get him.
And the thing is as well that with the government makeup this time, it's a lot harder for them to do that without immediately taking internal hits from being too woke. Like, this national government could never do a cycleway. Not with the way that Simeon Brown's built his career, just within the National Party, but not with New Zealand First and ACT yapping at their heels inside Parliament either. They should do those things strategically, but I don't think they have the talent or the guts.
Or the done, right? Like the coalitions are just different. Like the ways they need to lean is different, and Luxon doesn't have the political or managerial talent to like keep these coalitions together in the same way as John Key had the kind of belligerence to manage that shit. It's just a different era, and fortunately for us, they don't have the talent to do that. I mean, look at the front bench of the first Key years. Like, I think even we have to admit that I'm going to hand it to them, John, and say that they had some smart,
fascinating change of pace from Philip.
They had some smart people.
Philip's moving left
in that government. Yeah,
a sensible centrist.
Yeah, he's occupying the center ground.
Always.
We did mention this earlier, though. Like with National abandoning Key English national like center rightism, that's where Labour will go. I am putting my hand on the lathe, losing several fingers in the process. The Labour government is going to have a policy platform somewhere around Bill English's 2017 platform at the next election, because that's how they think they win. And it's, I mean, I was just thinking, like, the 2026, how many things are this government actually going to have started building?
They're not building. I don't think they're capable of building. They don't have the money.
No, like roads of national significance. There's money for that. Like, how many of these projects are actually going to get going before 2026? Because we are we are going to hit like, even with the fast track stuff. So it's going to be changing the settings of the existing system. It's going to be fiddling with the control knobs, which is, as we know, Labour's favourite trick in power. But they're not going to get anything done, and they're hoping that the economy recovers, not because of anything they're doing, but because of wider economic factors. Like,
they're hoping the world becomes more stable.
Well, they're the fuel prices have gone down because they've increased oil production, so that's good because it's going to push inflation down, and that's got nothing to do with what the government's doing. All of the shipping costs have gone down, apart from our brave friends off the Yemen Peninsula, with their fantastic like string-powered ability to disrupt global trade. Like, good on you, boys. That pushed up prices, but everything is still like, they're going to point at economic improvement, but it's got nothing to do with what they're doing. So it's got to be real. What have they done? Like it just, none of it seems to add up.
They're going to get the election, and it's going to be like, wow, you made everyone's lives worse.
Yeah.
And you got nothing to show for it.
Yeah. Are we going to get another 2014? Are we going to get on? We're on the cusp of something special. Like,
yes.
Can Chris Luxon sell that?
No.
No. So
Luxon the rock star.
Yeah.
Well,
He's gonna get 660 to come out and be like, it's a rock star economy. I mean, an R&B economy. I don't know.
It's more kind of a reggae vibes based kind of thing.
It's a reggae-based economy.
Barbecue reggae.
It's a barbecue reggae economy, and that's why the National Party will legalize weed at the next election.
That's right.
that's how to do it. That's how to do it.
And you know what? Nandor wins every time. He's playing the long game. I think that's why he's sopping to the right so much on Twitter now. I think it's really funny that I think it's really funny that you're talking about like Chris Hipkins, because like, should he come out? Should he say this stuff? And like, I feel like almost at this point, because Chris Hipkins has been prime minister, and I guess people don't have that much of a memory because we have like cultural amnesia, but not quite the same extent as the US, the UK. But like, if he came out really hard against the government, I feel like people would be like, this is insincere, because when you were in power, you were doing much of the same stuff, just not as bad. Like, do you actually believe this? I don't know if people would really believe him, because Labour didn't really do anything.
I don't think he really believes in much at all, honestly.
No, I mean, I know he doesn't, but I'm saying, like, how would you be perceived? Like,
Yeah.
if you're playing the optics game, if you're doing the pure, like, rational pundit brain thing and you're in Labour, wouldn't you kind of be like, well, Hipkins could actually come out and say he's against all this stuff, but would people actually believe it? Probably not.
I mean, here's the thing: Hipkins was a front bencher, and he's never going to escape from that.
You just have to get rid of him, is what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah,
the faster the better.
I-
Really,
like, you
it's
put-
already been too late.
You could put him back on the front bench, I think. Like, I think you could. I think he is good at a particular kind of politics.
Give him education again.
Yep, there you go.
Put him back in his fucking box, because Jacinda just kept giving like playing Buckaroo with him during the pandemic. And it was like, oh, Chippy can do that. Chippy can do this. Chippy can do that. And give him education and stick Kieran Macker or someone on the bench because in the front thing, because it can't be. We couldn't have gone into the next election with Grant Robertson as finance minister. It's fucking poison. We can't go into the next election with Chris Hipkins as leader, because same thing. You know, it's you did this. You were ultimately responsible for it. And if we're going to play the game at the next election of Chris Luxon, you made everyone's lives worse, you piece of shit, we hate you. He can't be able to point and say, well, yeah, I'm only doing it because that guy fucked up. You know, if it's Kieran McAnulty or Bryce Edwards' favorite, Willie Jackson, then maybe you can get around that with some particularly strong messaging. You know, you can say, yeah, I was part of that government, and we're really proud of the record of the stuff that we actually achieved that this government undid in the first, and like undid. They've made your life worse. Hipkins can't do that. He does not have that. He does not have that in him. You know, he is not going to be allowed it by the media either. He's not going to be able to get away clean from this. Like, yeah, he was prime minister for like a year. Was it a year?
9 months.
9 months. He was prime minister for 9 months. But it's still ultimately, you're in the job. You chose to go into the election with those policies. Again, I think I mentioned it last time I was on here. Labour didn't think they were going to lose that election. They really didn't think they were going to lose that election. They thought that by 2026, Three Waters would be underway, making people's lives easier. They thought the reforms of the DHBs and stuff, because that's still ongoing into Health New Zealand, would be done, and they could point at reforming the health system. They'd be able to point at the IREX thing and say, and we built this and we built that. Like, they didn't expect to lose that election, which is why it's so dangerous to go into the next election with a guy the public saw the choices he made and said, we don't rate you. We'd rather have the bald guy, granddad racist, and the robot from the Libertarian Party. Like, and yet again, you know, back to the UK and stuff a little bit. When the public have been asked, like, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, or you wish it was someone else. Wish it was someone else was 56% of respondents.
Doesn't even Corbyn like come in really good on those kind of polls as well?
No, because he is not to be mentioned ever again. He is in the memory hole. But people wish it was someone else. And by the time Luxon gets through the next year and a half or so, and we get into election season, Labour needs somebody that the public don't wish was someone else. Chris Hipkins, people are going to look at him and go, oh, no, not this guy.
I mean, I do think that's on the agenda. Like, I'd be incredibly surprised if halfway through next year Labour doesn't have a new leader. I think that's the time you wait for. If I was Kieran, I would be like, keep digging yourself that hole, Chris. Like,
oh no, they'd be working in concert. I think Hipkins knows as well. I think Hipkins is handing it
he's a
off.
caretaker, right? Surely everyone on the front bench of Labour knows that they're not going into the next election with him as leader. but he's enough of a bloody like boring careerist. Yeah, I see your face, John. I know
Yeah.
Labour. Look, Labour will lose everything they have the possible chance of losing, right? But I do like I rate their bloody-minded ambition enough to think that someone's going to take over next year. Whether that's going to be a good thing, we'll see what they run on, right? And they might run on like Starmerist, Albaneseist, like blandness. I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. If
That's the risk. That's the huge risk.
if Kieran McAnulty takes over and says, "Don't worry, don't hope for better things," like that wouldn't be at all surprising to me. That's essentially what I'd expect from Labour.
It's hard.
If Hipkins and McNulty are working together, they're gonna do some PR like hand over TikTok thing where they're like, "It's not chuggy, it's
stop.
based."
That's actually
take it like what Chris Hipkins takes his t-shirt off, and then it's like a ripped McAnulty as the t-shirt gets.
Oh.
No,
over
Chris
his head.
Hipkins walking towards Parliament and fucking Ute pulls up and just fucking knocks him for 6. He flies off the screen to Shooting Star.
They really put their budget into this.
Oh my
I wish
God.
I had Phil's faith.
I hope I
in
get
the,
to work on it.
in the Labour Party as an institution to know when it's going to lose. But just remember, the only reason Labour got into government in 2017 is because Andrew Little finally realised after something that everyone else could see for about 6 to 8 months, and finally they pulled the Hail Mary. Like for all of the popularity of Ardern and stuff, let's not forget that they were going to fucking lose to Bill English, like, and we were going to have 12 years of national. Up until the point that Little went, "Oh fuck, everyone hates me," and then like dipped out, which is possibly like the most self-aware thing a Labour politician in this country has done ever.
Also,
Like,
the thing that
They're not known for it.
Also, the thing that everyone hates to bring up is that almost all the votes that Jacinda got were from the Green Party that election, right? Like she swerved left, she didn't swerve right. She took all the like lib urbanists who were already in the coalition. It wasn't like a
Also, she was saying she should have moved centre right.
yeah.
2020 was the state can do things, people. Government can do things for you. And people were like, shit, yeah, it can. And then they went out and gave them a supermajority. And then Labour was like, you know what? Actually, we don't want to do anything.
I think that cackle is probably the best place to leave this.
No!
We are running late. We have topics to cover, but I'm sorry we have to cut it off there. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. I'll link to everyone, but we don't have time for pictures. I'm sorry, Simon. Not this time around. We have done about an hour and a half, maybe it's a little bit less.
Sorry, Mitch.
Edit. But yeah, really good to have you all along. Thanks for joining us again, John. To let everyone know about what's happening over in the worst place on earth.
it's bad.
Thank you, Philip, Ginny, and Simon for joining us as well. Thank you also to the audience. Thanks for listening. Share, like, subscribe. Jump on the Patreon if you want to give us some money and help us continue to produce independent left-wing media. We'll be back next week for something at some time. Probably current events. We'll catch you then.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The words upon now is paid with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day. In this vindictive, forgetful fucking